All right, welcome to Last Week in Destiny. I'm Stonemason83. This is the third episode in this series, a video podcast hosted on Spotify and YouTube. So you can either listen to this or you can watch it. And today, I'm recording this on Monday, the day before Tuesday Reset. We got the 10-year anniversary of Destiny. And you can go into the old tower in the Pale Heart and look for the 5 semi-secret chests. I mean, they're hiding in plain sight, so they're not exactly secret. But you go and loot those on each one of your characters, and as you can see here, these are what the armor sets look like. So pretty cool, and a nice little additional way that you can build into your fashion. Additionally, we got 5 articles worth of Frontier news, and I'm just going to briefly talk about some of that news. But mostly this is about Last Week in Destiny, right? So we got the Choir of One second catalyst perk. We had the most bountiful and slash ridiculous GM farm of the entire episode, yielding you enough strange coins to buy class items every 2 GM runs and max out all your resources very fast. And because of this ridiculous farm, you've probably got more Uzume snipers than you know what to do with, and this is by no means a viable weapon to use in endgame PvE, but that could change one day. So if adaptive frame snipers ever become viable, what roles might you want to have in your vault, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then I also did the Master Substratum Challenge in Salvation's Edge just to get my 3 Adept raid weapons for the week, and I toyed around in Master Ghosts of the Deep as well. I've got 6 builds to talk about, so that'll be the meat of the video, and most of those builds revolve around 1,000 voices. And I'll probably talk about the loot that I got this week as well. All right, so the main takeaway from the Frontiers dev insights slash deep dives articles that we got, like if you're looking for, a preview of what the story is going to be or where we're going, what kind of new things are being put in the game, you're not going to get that out of these articles. The articles are mostly basically covering what I would call a restoration or a rehabilitation of Destiny as we know it. Like they're just kind of buffing the entire game from a user interface perspective, like the actual user interface, the playlists versus the open world, and our loot, right? And difficulty, which is something that I've wanted in this game for quite a while. So I'm actually thrilled with a lot of this stuff that has been brought to us by our new game director, Tyson Green. So it seems like he's the guy that they decided to pick to do this overhaul of Destiny and kind of fix the mess that it currently lives in, right? Like, if you're a new player trying to play this game, forget it. Where do you go to do stuff? What should you be doing? If you need a resource, where do you go to get it, right? You have to basically have Reddit, YouTube, and third-party, game testers and experts on the game to just give you an inkling as to what to do, which is definitely not user-friendly, right? So, doing all this kind of stuff, just making everything much more user-friendly would make the game more appealing to new players, but also older players alike, I think. Like I said, this is something that I've wanted and I've talked about. So one of the things that I'm most excited about is they're planning on making this destination screen no longer be kind of the default screen. Instead, we're going to have this portal system, right? So you'll still be able to go to the planets, I guess, and travel to those planets to free roam or do public events or whatever, and probably select missions to do on certain planets from this same screen. But the default screen is now going to be what they're calling the portal screen, and that is going to basically be a playlist menu. that is going to show you clearly what activities there are in the game to do and what rewards you can get from them, and they're buffing those rewards or balancing those rewards to make replayability, to make a lot of older missions replayable, right? And so this is great. Like, I've talked several times about the weekly campaign missions in the Throne World and Neomuna, and a lot of the older missions, right? They just don't get the light of day because we have Grandmaster Nightfalls that just absolutely dump materials and resources and exotics. Everything that you need in the game you can get from 1 or 2 runs of doing GMs on a weekly basis, and they have fresh loot as well, right? They get new weapons every week, whereas no other activity in the game gives you anything close to that, right? And the thing is, most of the activities in the game other than GMs are better than GMs, right? Like, all this content that we got, that Bungie has invested so much passion into, is not getting the light of day because it's not replayable, because the loot is old, it's stale, it's not providing you what you need, and it just pales in comparison to Grandmasters, right? Meanwhile, Grandmasters are like, there's 10-year-old strikes in there. Like, I don't want to do Devil's Lair. Like, I'm sick of that strike. Like, I want to play missions that I like from various planets and campaign missions, and offensive like Wellspring, and maybe they bring back Catch Crash and Nightmare Containment or something. Like, there's so much to do in this game, and I want it all to be replayable. So hopefully that's where they're going to go with it. It sounds like it. But yeah, and like, one of the things they said was they want to eliminate the need for the gamer to go and look for third-party websites and basically experts on the game. Like, for myself, I have like 15 spreadsheets, and yes, I'm an absolute nerd and I enjoy making spreadsheets, but I have like 15 spreadsheets that I keep in a master Excel sheet with different subjects, like covering loot, covering god rolls, covering weekly missions, weekly surges, what I should be, like a weekly checklist of what I can do in the game. And there's really no reason for me to have that other than, my personal desire to be a complete nerd. But yeah, somebody just picking up the game and casual gamers should not feel like they have to have these third-party options. Like, the options to figure out what to do in the game should be clear in the game. So that's good. And then they're going to be making the loot going forward more consistent, supposedly, right? So this is addressing like loot as we know it. What's craftable, what's not, what's enhanceable, what's not. Why do some weapons get 6 perks on them that you can enhance, but others get 2? Why are world drops enhanceable, but dungeon weapons aren't? So yeah, they're gonna iron out a lot of this consistency, as well as like the rewards that you get from the activities. And one of the coolest things about this is supposedly they're going to be adding custom modifiers so that you can actually modify playlist activities and missions to your liking for your desired loot gains, right? Or just for personal accomplishment, right? So yeah, you'll be able to tailor stuff, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I'm super hyped that a lot of the content that we have in the game is going to basically be rehabilitated to be replayable. So pretty cool. And like this portal mock-up that they showed us for the playlists is basically what I pictured that this game kind of needs, because half of the game is open world and half of it is playlists. Actually, probably the majority of it is playlists, right? What is Destiny? It's a looter shooter, but is it an open world game? No, it's not. It's not like Skyrim, right? And it's also not like just a multiplayer game where you're just selecting a map to go into and play. It's diverse and it has a lot of different things, but there's so many missions that they're just selectable nodes, right? And they should all be in like a clearly defined playlist, and then the open world section should just be kind of its own thing, right? And I hope that they, with this playlist, with this portal playlist default menu, I hope that that doesn't mean that they're gonna not improve upon the open world system, because that has needed a lot of help as well, right? So the Pale Heart is probably the best open world system that we currently have in the game, minus the lack of difficulty options, and Fireteam size. So I like that you can go into Overthrow solo and or with 3 players, but there's no optional difficulties, so it can get kind of stale there, or it can become too easy. But overall, like, there's a lot of RNG, there's a lot of random enemy spawns, and yeah, it's very good. It's very, very good. It's not like just going to do the same old public event in the Cosmodrome where you're just sitting on a stack of glimmer waiting. Like, it's a good it's a good gameplay loop in the Pale Heart, and it reminds me of kind of like Nightmare Containment, and Terminal Overload in Neomuna. So I hope that Bungie continues to expand on some of these open world systems as far as gameplay goes, because that is also very engaging to me. Like, you don't always want to be on a locked loadout or in endgame activities, where you're kind of pressured to use like a specific build or whatever. Sometimes you just want to like roam around the beauty of the Destiny universe and acquire resources at your own pace, and maybe set the controller down, so that you can go do something else for a few minutes, like go to the bathroom without feeling like you're letting your team down, or gonna get kicked to orbit or losing points in a mission, right? Like, I like the casual experience as well. So for the Grandmaster farm that we currently have, for this past week at least, the Insight Terminus, super good farm. It's a very fast Nightfall. You can get it done on Fireteam Finder or LFG in like 10 to 15 minutes, just with being slightly optimal. And part of that is because we have infinite ammo on 1000 voices that Bungie let slide for the week, even though it was a bug, and infinite sword ammo, right? So yeah, maybe you had some time to experiment with some different builds. Pretty cool. But ultimately, the farm was so good that it put all other activities basically on hold for the week. Like, there was a lot of other things that I wanted to do, or that I typically do on a weekly basis, like Dual Destiny, Pathfinder, and the Pale Heart. And then occasionally I'll do like the weekly campaign missions for Ascendant Alloys. But when you have double Nightfall rewards, with broken builds that you can use in the Nightfall, it means that every single run you get, especially with Xur's favor, you get 22 strange coins, which means that every 2 runs you have 40 to 44 strange coins, right? Which means that you can buy a class item, an exotic class item, because Xur was selling them this past week. You also get 4 Adept Nightfall ciphers instead of 2, which means that every 3 runs you can buy an additional Adept Uzume sniper rifle from Zavala, because otherwise your ciphers will just sit maxed out. However, it does cost 50,000 glimmers to buy one of those Adept weapons, and this ended up becoming an issue for me when I didn't think it would, because I never really thought Glimmer would become an issue. But you also get up to 10 prisms, especially if you're using the ghost mod that I'm using. What is it? Core Harvest? Or, sorry, Modularity. I think I had that on by mistake. Prism Harvest, which is what I typically run. So you earn bonus enhancement prisms on completing ritual activities. That gets the double Nightfall reward as well. So I was getting at least 10 prisms every run, which means that you can outright buy an Ascendant Alloy after every run, right? Or you can just let your prisms max out completely, right? So right now mine are basically maxed out at 92. So it means that I would definitely need to buy an Ascendant Alloy after every single GM run. Otherwise, I would just be wasting 10 prisms per run, right? Like I would be not getting the rewards that I could be. You also get like double Vanguard reps, so you need to make sure to go back to the tower and go check Zavala, so that you can claim all of your Vanguard rep rewards, which is just more enhancement cores and prisms, and then your Ascendant shard as well, right? So yeah, it's just an absolutely insane farm. On top of course, getting like 4 golf balls per run, which like it's ridiculous. Like we there's there's nothing that you could even do with the Ascendant shards if you're an end game player and you've been playing for long enough. You've probably got all of the exotics in the game already, masterworked for the most part. At least all the ones that you want to use. So like yeah, it's not really worth just dumping golf balls into armor, because then you're spending prisms and cores and glimmer unnecessarily. So I just let the golf balls just sit in my vault, in my inventory, maxed out, no big deal. I also maxed out my exotic ciphers just from like completing Xenology for Zur and claiming those ciphers from I think Zur's rep and Raoul's rep, right? But yeah, I started the week with like 2 Ascendant alloys, and now I've got 24, and I literally bought basically every single one with prisms, which is insane. Like any other week, this wouldn't really be a thing. So hopefully you got in there while the getting was good. Of course, we got Uzume sniper rifles. You get like 2 every single run. So what role should you hold on to, if any? I'm not recommending that you do hold on to them, just because sniper rifles in generally, especially if you're like a casual console controller player like myself, sniper rifles are like super inconsistent to use. They don't have like the same aim assist values as any other weapon in the game. Like basically they have none. While you're scoped in with a sniper rifle, you have no awareness of your surroundings, unlike most other weapons in the game. And if you want to use something for ranged precision damage, then a linear fusion rifle is just going to allow you to maintain your awareness, and it's going to give you like super sticky aim assist where it's just easy to land crits, whereas with the snipers they're unwieldy, and yeah, and the Uzume is a adaptive frame sniper rifle, right? So it's the worst archetype compared to like the Ikelos being a rapid fire or aggressive frames. Adaptives just don't really have a place in any kind of the meta, right? And let alone the fact like there's not really any encounters or combat scenarios in this game where sniper rifles are advantageous to use over other weapons, right? But things could definitely change, so I'm going to hold on to 4 of like the 50 or so that I got to drop. And so what roles am I holding on to? I'm just holding on to ones that I thought were kind of interesting. So I've got 2 for damage, and I've got 1 for just kind of just overall utility. So just to basically for stunning champions, and just occasionally shooting red bars or whatever. And then I've got another one for ad clear, which yeah, so I'm probably not going to use the ad clear version or the damage versions. I'll probably just end up using the utility option. So for the utility option, I'm going clown cartridge and explosive payload. Explosive payload does conflict with the precision damage values of a sniper rifle, but we're not using this thing for damage anyways. So like getting that optimal precision damage isn't necessarily key, whereas explosive payload can do area of effect damage, and it has unlimited range, and it's still a static 15% damage buff, right? So even if it's a body shot, you're still going to do a substantial amount of damage. If there's champions involved, explosive payload is very good versus champions. And we've also got origin traits like stunning recovery. You stun a champion, it refills the mag, right? So clown cartridge is just going to allow us to have a larger magazine size, which is nice. And on this roll here, like I've got Discord as an option as well. So if I end up doing a little bit of ad clear with it, then I can get some free ammo out of thin air that is automatically reloaded into the mag. And so for the ad clear version, I've got Discord and Incandescent, right? So Incandescence is going to get you a lot of kills. It can spread Scorch, set off an ignition here or there, and then Discord, the same thing. It's going to allow you to get ammo refunded. Basically, while Discord is up, you can get free ammo, right, and free reloads. So that's kind of interesting there. And then for the 2 damage rolls, like, I mean, these could be good. Like if adaptive frames end up getting buffed so that they're ahead of rapid fires for like total damage or something like that. 4th time's the charm with Vorpal and or Deconstruct should go a long way. Primarily Vorpal, like, because 4th times in Vorpal is going to allow you to do static 15% extra damage to bosses without having to do any work to get that buff. And 4th times the charm is just going to increase your total damage by like 50% or whatever. And then instead of running Vorpal, if you can get one with Deconstruct, that's a 40% damage buff versus select targets, right? So what does the perk say again? It's constructs and vehicles, right? So there are quite a few types of constructs and vehicles. Like there's Briggs, there's Shriekers, and Shriekers have a crit spot, so that could be good if we get like a big Shrieker boss. Do 40% more damage. And Deconstruct is also a reload perk, so it automatically reloads the mag as you do sustained damage. So combining that with 4th times the charm, like you should basically never have to reload this thing. And you're going to have your total damage extended by 4th time, and you're going to have a 40% damage buff, right? So that could be kind of interesting. So despite the GM farm taking up the bulk of my time this week, the first thing I did was I went into Master Ghosts of the Deep on reset early in the week because I wanted to see if I can do a little bit of testing with Ghosts of the Deep. And well, I did so. I put up a build video on Tuesday or Wednesday using this build right here on Insurmountable Skullfort Titan. I'll be discussing the build coming up here again, but you can also just check that video if you just want the breakdown with the solo flawless gameplay. You can do that. But just going over the dungeon as a rotator, look, I'd love to replay this dungeon. Probably my favorite dungeon in the game. Definitely the solo flawless that I'm the most proud of. But unfortunately, like when this thing comes around for as a rotator, which is the only time that you get to play it on master and have modifiers on there to play with, and challenge yourself and get some endgame loot, like the loot is just not worth it. That is the unfortunate thing. Like if you can complete the ritual, the first encounter in the dungeon, in 10 to 15 minutes on average, well, you can just go do a GM Insight Terminus in the same amount of time, and we already discussed what kind of rewards you can get from there. Well, if you go and do this Ghost of the Deep, the first encounter, right, which takes the same amount of time, you should get the same amount of loot, basically, right? You should get similar value in loot, especially because this is like this is the weekly dungeon, like once in a blue moon, right? So it should have increased rewards, but it doesn't. So you complete the first encounter, and what do you get? You get 1 enhancement core, 1 prism. If you're lucky, you'll get a shard, like a golf ball, and then you'll get 1 loot drop. So it might be a weapon, and it might, which means that it might not even be a piece of artifice armor. So you're not even guaranteed artifice armor, right? If artifice armor is even good in the current sandbox, like with the way that armor works and everything, and now that exotics have our artifice slots. So I mean, yeah, like the rewards are absolutely pathetic, and Ghosts of the Deep is miles better content, and you can tell that Bungie has invested so much time and energy and passion into these dungeons and raids and endgame PvE stuff. But you could just go do a 10-year-old strike on the Grandmaster playlist and get like 10 times the amount of loot, if not more, like 20 times, right? You get literally 10 times the amount of prisms, like 4 times the amount of shards. You get like 2 to 3 adept weapons, multiple enhancement cores. You get 22 strange coins, which is halfway to an exotic class item, right? So like, yeah, it's absolutely pathetic. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Frontiers is going to do with this, but I am going to discuss the build And like I said, I have a solo flawless gameplay on my channel using this build here, so you can check that. Found the time this week to get in my 3 runs of the Master Salvation's Edge weekly challenge, which is for the first encounter, so very optimal farm, I guess you would call it, right? I mean, if you have 3 characters, I guess you can classify it as a farm because you're doing the same thing 3 times, and that can, you know, get you 3 pieces of Adept loot. So you can do this every week for a consistent 3 a week, but it's not always optimal. Like if it's the witness, or, you know, sometimes getting the checkpoint is an issue, especially if you're like me and you do everything on Fireteam Finder or LFG. Like, you don't have the time to run a full master raid, you don't have the people to get together to do it. So yeah, when the first encounter comes around for the weekly challenge, that's a good time to go in there and get your Adept loot, right? So we have the same exact surges and overcharged weapons as we do on all other higher difficulty options for other activities. Like same thing for warlords. We've got void and solar surge with overcharged weapons, but the weekly modifiers for the raids, not just the current raid, but also the weekly raids, is a lot better than the dungeon rotator, right? Because dungeons offer you a chance at artifice armor, and that's basically it. Whereas master raids give you a high stat focused armor, so it's not artifice. But like this week was intellect focused armor, so you're guaranteed to get a very spiky intellect roll, right? So it's kind of interesting that you have this rotating stat focused armor, but mostly like the adept weapons is what it's really all about, right? It's the only time that you can get weapons that are better than what the standard raid has to offer, right? You have to do master to get the best stuff, which makes sense. Whereas with dungeons, you don't get any better loot as far as the weapons go, right? You don't even get additional perks to choose from. Like, you're not increasing your likelihood of getting the god roll that you're looking for in master dungeons. Whereas with master raids, you're getting straight up better weapons because they're adept. It's going to be better than all the craftable versions. And Bungie really went to town with Salvation's Edge, and they gave us 6 perks, right? Up to 6 perks. Not always, but I think if you have all the weapons already crafted, like, you're guaranteed to get 6 perks. So for the cost of 2 Ascendant Alloys, you can have 6 enhanced perks to choose from on your adept collective purpose weapons, right? So I got this sniper here with 6, I got a glaive with 6, and I got the bow with 6. So I mean, that makes it worth it to go and do it, right? Even if it takes you a couple hours to coordinate an LFG team or on Fireteam Finder to get it done, it's very worth it. But yeah, and so the challenge itself is actually pretty easy. For the first encounter, I mean, it does require good team communication, and it requires everybody to be on kind of the same page. Of course, everybody has to know what the challenge is, so as long as there's somebody there to explain it and get things coordinated, it's a very easy challenge, right? Like any challenge in a raid, I think. But yeah, the first encounter is accessible, like I said. You just start it from the get-go. You don't need a checkpoint. You just have to go through the traversal, and you can get there very fast. And so basically the challenge it's called the Scenic Route, or the Scenic Route, however you want to pronounce that. And basically you have your wall team, you have your corner team, and the one team needs to stay, right? So the team that gets the Scions in their room, they're going to stay put to contain the Hydra, right? So they can kill the Hydra when the other team kills their Minotaur, and that way you can just facilitate the other team going through the doors until they get to their 4th room where the overload will be, right? So the challenge is to skip the first overload that spawns. That's why the team that gets the Scions, they stay put, right? If they move forward, then eventually they're going to hit their overload before the other team, and if you kill that overload, challenge failed, right? So the easiest thing is just have that team stay in the first room that they get in and kill the Hydra in that room. And then once they've killed the Hydra twice, they can just go out and kill the Tormentor. And that way the other team just traverses through their rooms quicker. And you can still get the challenge, or you can get the each phase of the encounter done with enough time left on the clock. And if you need a build to bring into the challenge, and especially if you're a Warlock, then I would recommend that you take in something like this with Nezarec, Sin, and Choir of One, seen as Choir of One is all the hotness right now. You could build very well into it with Nezarec because there's a lot of seasonal artifact mods that play into auto rifles, of course, and void damage as well. So these two combine really well together. Choir of One basically feeds you grenade energy, ability energy in general. So more arcane needles, more weakening vortex grenades, more nova bombs, more rifts with threadlings, all thanks to Nezarec Sin and this insanely good exotic auto rifle. And I put out, this was so good that I put out a build video with the unedited gameplay completing the challenge, right? And I actually explained the challenge in that video as well, so you can check the channel there. And that video kind of popped off a little bit today. It was a very slow start, but yeah, super optimal build. So as we discussed the exotics, I'm using Nova Bomb, Healing Rift, Arcane Needle, Vortex Grenades, Feed the Void, and Weaver's Call. And the reason I'm using Weaver's Call and not Helion is because we need to do some dark damage to build up our Transcendence, right? Because I'm not using Fragments to give Transcendence because I think it's a waste of Fragments. Instead, we're using valuable Fragments like Facet of Protection for survivability and damage resistance while surrounded, with Dominance for the weakening effect on those void grenades, and then Facet of Courage to give those void grenades and your Nova Bomb 10% more damage, and then Facet of Dawn because we've got 3 arcane needles, which is a very easy way to get radiant from any range. So that's 3 times that you can get radiant at about 6 seconds each, so that's 18 seconds worth of radiant. So Facet of Dawn is very well suited to arcane needle, and then I'm using Facet of Solitude for extra dark damage and damage resistance in the form of severing enemies to reduce their damage output by 40%. Right? You could also use Facet of Balance and or Bravery here to give yourself unraveling rounds and volatile rounds, and maybe accelerate your ability spam even a little bit further with Balance, but it's really not necessary with Devour and Nezarec Sin. The strength of the build basically comes down to Choir of One and Vortex Grenades, and then you don't even need a heavy weapon because Choir of One, when you use the Wyvern Blast, does a lot of damage just in itself, and then you've also got that Nova Bomb to absolutely nuke the Tormentors or the Subjugators. Right, so it means you can also use an Eager Edge Sword like what I'm doing here. So my weapon loadout consists of Imminence, the Strand SMG from the raid itself. On this roll I've got Perpetual Motion and Chaos Reshape just for to make it feel a bit more like a laser beam, to give it additional healing and a 35% damage buff when it's procced, that being Chaos Reshaped. So very good there. Also, it's anti-barrier and it's overcharged, of course, to match the overcharged weapons modifier, but being able to pierce the Hydra shields and the Hobgoblin shields is pretty nice. And then the other half has Eager Edge, right? So I mean, that allows you, especially if you're capping plates like what I was doing, then it allows you to go and collect that resonance in between ping-ponging the charge back and forth to your partner, right? And with Whirlwind Blade on there, it's also just an easy way to take out the Subjugators if you need to, but by and large you could do everything, all your heavy damage dealing with Choir of One and Nova Bomb. Stat distribution, 100 resilience, of course, discipline as well, because like you want to be spamming those vortex grenades, obviously. And then I would just balance your recovery and your strength about equal as your next 2 priorities, followed by intellect and mobility last, ideally keeping everything above tier 3, right? And as far as combat mods go, I basically focus everything on producing orbs of power for radiant orbs from the artifact, and getting armor charge so that I can use special finisher as needed, because Choir of One does run out of ammo more often than rocket sidearms, especially when you're using the Wyvern Blast. So just being able to do finishers to get extra special ammo is good. You can also run a special ammo finder mod because your heavy is not being used. You're not burning through ammo on your eager edge sword, right? You're just using it for movement. You don't need heavy ammo finder, so just run special ammo finder, run special ammo finisher, run scavenger. Void Scavenger or Harmonic Scavenger if that's matching your super, and you should be good there, right? And so for the Choir of One catalyst that we got this week, destabilizing rounds, right? So for week 1 we got subsistence, and now we've got destabilizing rounds. So I threw it on there because I wanted to test it. I honestly was a little bit skeptical. I didn't really think a whole lot about it. Destabilizing rounds is kind of an underwhelming perk on most weapons, but most of the weapons that we have it available on are legendary primary weapons. So this is a whole nother ball game when you're talking special weapons, and especially exotic special weapons. Volatile and destabilizing rounds has like a massive effect, right? So what I experienced in Master Substratum was you can do one single Wyvern Blast into a spawning group of adds, and it'll basically chain react kill the entire group, right? So it's absolutely insane, and I think it is by far the best available catalyst that we have right now, and I think it will be ultimately, because I think we only get one more catalyst perk, which is Onslaught, and Onslaught is an ad clear. Yes, technically you can get the most amount of DPS out of Onslaught because it just increases your fire rate, which means you're also going to be burning through it more ammo, right? So it's not increasing your total damage, that's staying the same, it's just increasing your DPS, but it requires you chaining kills. So if you want to use it for DPS purposes on a boss, it means you need to kill ads first. That's a very awkward situation. So like, you're not going to go and fight the witness with this thing or something like that, right? Because you don't have the time to be killing ads just to get your onslaught fire rate going, right? Whereas just treat Choir of One as it is in its raw form. Its Wyvern Blast does a lot of damage. It's always consistent, right? You don't need to use Onslaught to do this weird gameplay loop where you kill ads first. Instead, just benefit from the fact that you can do massive ad clear with destabilizing rounds, and you could just use the gun as it's intended, right? You can use the aim down sight fire mode, or you can use the Wyvern Blast and burn through more ammo for more total damage, right? And more splash damage because it's going to proc destabilizing rounds. So yeah, that would be my recommendation there. Subsistence doesn't really help you out a whole lot. You still have to, because the magazine is so small on it, especially when you're using the Wyvern Blast. Subsistence doesn't reload the magazine enough for it to feel like it's helping you with the reload. Like, you still have to reload this thing like all the damn time. Subsistence is not helping you, right? Whereas with like a legendary primary like a hand cannon, subsistence kind of gets you more mileage, right? Not the case with Choir of One, so I would definitely go destabilizing rounds 100%. So back to Titan for the Insight Terminus, I decided to run this wacky 1000 voices Pyrogales build on the Solar subclass, so just a core build here with Burning Maul, to obviously enhance that with Pyrogales, but also our Consecration, right? I wanted to, the purpose of the build was twofold, was to obviously increase Scorch and Ignitions and area of effect of 1000 voices, but also to go back and play test Consecration on the core subclass. So yeah, Burning Maul with Consecration, both are being enhanced by Pyrogales, right? You get that extra tornado effect out of your Consecration, and you get the one and done capability, the massive amount of burst damage of Burning Maul. And so I'm pairing this with Hammer Strike so I can move around the map fast, right? Because we don't need to use Throwing Hammer. We don't need to use our standard charged melee for anything other than Consecration. So having Hammer Strike is an invaluable movement tool tool when you need to save your melee ability, right? Because you could still use it for movement, and then you just have to wait, 10 seconds to get your full charge back, right? So you save your charge this way. Healing grenade, because we're in GMs and obviously you need some way to heal. I mean, we are running Soul Invictus here for extra healing. We get restoration from our sunspots, of course, but the healing aid comes in clutch and we don't really need it for anything else anyways. So the fragments that I'm using here, obviously Ember of Ashes to build up our Scorch stacks quicker and set off more ignitions with 1000 Voices and our Consecration, and our Aberrant Action Rocket Sidearm with Incandescent. And then Ember of Char is going to spread Scorch on those ignitions, which is really going to allow us, especially with the addition of Solar Fulmination from the seasonal artifact, it's going to allow for ignition chaining in certain situations, especially if you're playing solo. Then you're basically, all the Scorch stacks are going straight to you. They're not being overwritten by other players doing Scorch, and if you're solo, it's going to be a nutty time. I'm also using Ember of Eruption here, which is also enhancing ignitions in the same way that Facet of Ruin does from Prismatic. It doesn't increase the damage, it just increases the area of effect. It also gives you a plus 10 strength stat, and I was particular about this build. I wanted to run triple 100s with 100 resilience, discipline, and strength to really max out the spam ability of Consecration on Solar and see how it compares to triple Frenzied Blades on Prismatic. And it does pretty well, especially when you use this last fragment that I have here, Ember of Searing, which gives you melee energy when you defeat scorched targets. And this build is all about scorching targets. So yeah, we were able to spam Consecration basically whenever we needed it. And I never really used Consecration on Pyrogales before this, so it was quite a lot of fun. I will say, though, that Ember of Eruption for the increased ignition size is really not worth it, in my opinion, as a fragment slot. If you can have relatively high strength as far as stats go, then Ember of Searing is going to do the bulk of the melee regen anyways by defeating scorched targets. So you'd be better off just using something like Ember of Solace, right? Because then you would get increased restoration time from dipping in and out of your sunspots and from your healing grenade, right? You could use Empyrean, you could use Mercy, right? So there's some options that you can use there to heal, or even better, you can use Benevolence, right? If you're playing in a fire team, and especially with Aberrant Action, then you're applying Cure to your allies. You're giving your allies restoration from your healing grenades. So Ember of Benevolence is going to give you 400, I believe it's 400%. So that's a 5 times multiplier on your abilities, right? So the absolute best fragment to use here instead of Ember of Eruption would be, in a fire team setting, Ember of Benevolence, right? Then that's going to allow you to spam Consecration as if you were on Prismatic Titan. Most likely. I haven't play tested it, but theoretically it would, as long as you can apply those buffs to your allies, right? And if you're solo or if you're not near your allies, just go with Ember of Solace for survivability. That'd be my recommendation. But like I said, you can also use Ember of Mercy, so that when you do pick up those fire sprites that you're generating from Ember of Searing, then you're going to get restoration from those two as a pickup. So it's kind of like picking up an orb of power for recuperation. It involves you having to go out and fetch your restoration, right? Whereas Ember Solace is just going to increase the effectiveness of your healing grenade, which you can use at your any time without having to go and pick it up, right? You just throw it there at your feet. So all that said about the Pyrogales build, I did run the GM multiple times with it, and then I ended up just switching over to my Prismatic Fire and Ice build. I talked about this build in the first episode of the podcast, so you can look for that there. It should be time-stamped, but I'll go over it just briefly here. It's basically the exact same build. The only difference is, what am I using here in the first place, right? Fire and Ice, so that means obviously I was going to use 1000 voices, or you can use 1000 voices. If you're looking at the video here, you'll see I'm using Dragon's Breath instead, because I ended up just finding that 1000 voices was kind of overkill. Like, your teammates are using 1000 voices anyways most of the time if you're looking for runs on Fireteam Finder or LFG. And Dragon's Breath has like 10 rockets in reserves, and you're regularly picking up heavy ammo anyways, like enough for the most part. And Dragon's Breath is definitely better than 1000 voices. Because you're not sitting there charging up a fusion rifle, doing sustained damage to targets. It doesn't punish you if you have to lay off the trigger. Dragon's Breath, you can just, you can do the work that you got to do with your other weapons and abilities, and then just pull out Dragon's Breath for a quick shot and stow it and get back to work. And then meanwhile, Dragon's Breath is setting off ignitions by itself and then automatically reloading the rocket launcher, right? So yeah, I'm using Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap so that I can have basically 10-second stasis crystal grenades with my Diamond Lances, right? So obviously I'm using Diamond Lance as an aspect with Consecration, and then Glacial Quake as my super with a Glacial Grenade, so that we can basically double dip into Facet of Ruin for increased shatter damage and area of effect and increased ignition sizes, right? And because we're not using knockout here to give ourselves healing on our Consecration, on our slams, we're going to use Facet of Blessing. This is an absolute must to use if you're not going to use knockout. Facet of Blessing is going to give you health regen on melee kills, right? And that's any type of melee kills, not just charged melee kills, but glaive kills, just uncharged punches. Facet of Blessing is a lesser knockout for sure, but it is, it is guaranteed to help you out. And then and then the other fragments that I'm using here, balance, so that I could just have more grenade spam and more Consecration spam by doing light and dark damage, and Facet of Protection and Solitude for survivability, with Facet of Courage to increase our Consecration damage by 10% to frozen targets, right, or severed targets. Because we're using Solitude, we can sever targets with our weapons, and then get that buff, right? But we're also producing Diamond Lances left and right. Whether we're killing enemies or just shooting enemies in the head from behind a rally barricade, that's going to give you a Diamond Lance. It's a very rewarding style of ranged gameplay. So the setup that I have here with my weapons is for Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap, right? So what the exotic does is, as you do sustained damage, precision damage from behind a barricade, you get a Diamond Lance that spawns right there at your feet. So you don't have to look around or move to pick up that lance. So I'm using a good precision legendary weapon here. You can use any good precision weapon, whether it's an exotic or a legendary. The key is to just get behind your barricade and go to town on precision damage with that weapon, and then pretty much immediately you'll get a Diamond Lance at your feet. So while you're aimed down sight doing precision damage, you get that lance, and then you just hold square or whatever button or input you're using to pick up the lance, and you throw it all while having your aim on the target still, right? You never take your aim off the target. You're shooting, then all of a sudden you're throwing a lance, and then you're shooting and shattering, right? So it's just a very smooth, rewarding gameplay style that is going to increase your damage by quite a lot, because the stasis crystals, especially with Facet of Ruin, they do a substantial amount of damage, right? Because Shatter did get a buff with the release of the final shape. So, and the precision weapon that I'm using here is Nullify from Salvation's Edge with Heal Clip and Incandescent. Incandescent is just kind of nice because, like I said, we're double dipping into ignitions with Facet of Ruin, so it's going to spread Scorch, which can stack with Dragon's Breath and other Scorch effects. And it could do a better ad clear essentially because of the incandescent, right, which is gonna give you more heal clips to proc. But you could also go with like Chaos Reshaped or just a straight damage perk instead of incandescent, because it's you're playing safe at range anyways. The goal isn't necessarily to do ad clear with the weapon, it's more to do precision damage so you can spawn Diamond Lances, and then you can kind of focus all that attention on beefy targets like champions or bosses. Right. For ad clear, Dragon's Breath is obviously igniting entire rooms, and then your diamond lances are also shattering and doing ad clear as well. And then also for the for our kinetic slot here, we're running Lost Signal with auto loading holster and Vorpal enhanced. This is the crafted Radiolaria transposer weapon from the season. Area denial GL, so it's basically a legendary Wither Horde, and the the best thing about this thing is how fast it is at building up Transcendence. Because of the tick damage of the stasis pools that this thing leaves on the ground, it does damage over time, and it just builds up your Dark Transcendence like crazy. So this is actually a really nice gameplay loop with this weapon setup, because you've got two weapons that are auto-loading, right? You've got Dragon's Breath, which reloads itself, and then you've got light damage that is doing a ton of ad clear, right? So light damage is building up that light meter on your Transcendence from Dragon's Breath, and then Lost Signal is building up the dark. So you can basically shoot Lost Signal, shoot Dragon's Breath, have light and dark damage doing damage over time, while just going to town with Nullify on enemies, doing incandescent explosions and producing mini throwable glacial grenades via diamond lances for dark damage. So the amount of Transcendence energy that you get on this build is absolutely nuts. You're going to be popping Transcendence left and right, and when you do that, you just shoot another Dragon's Breath into a field of enemies, and then just go to town on Consecration and suspending, jolting shackle grenades, and everything's going to be dead. And then if something's still alive, like the boss in the boss room or whatever, use that Glacial Quake. And the most fun way to use Glacial Quake with this build is to first consecrate, mainly just shoot a Dragon's Breath. Shoot a Dragon's Breath at Kargan, and then immediately pop Glacial Quake, and you'll experience the most visually satisfying thing that the game has to offer, right? Ignitions and fire everywhere with shattering crystals all over the place. And it absolutely nukes Kargan, right? Especially, and then you pop Transcendence, and it's so funny. It's it was so fun that and effective. In all honesty, it was probably more effective than the Pyrogales build on Solar, because of the fact that you just have Transcendence. So I ended up running the GM like probably 10-15 times with this Cadmus Ridge build. And then one of the things that I got out of the run, or out of turning in strange coins, was Spirit of Hoarfrost and Syntheseps, and I thought, that could be an interesting alternative to use on this Fire and Ice build instead of Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap, because Hoarfrost will obviously make your barricade a stasis crystal wall, and then Syntheseps is going to massively increase your Consecration damage and your Glacial Quake damage. Well, actually, I don't know if it increases your Glacial Quake damage, because it's the Spirit version, it's not the core Synthos exotic, so it might not increase super damage. I don't think it does, actually, but you would have that massive Consecration damage. The downside, though, is Hoarfrost, the core exotic, and the Spirit is garbage. It's absolutely the most useless stasis exotic in the entire game, because you're replacing your barricade, and you're mandated to use a barricade. So you would have to give up thruster on Prismatic, and you'd have to use barricade, and then instead of getting a barricade, you're just making a crystal wall. So you can literally just do the same thing by throwing your Glacial Grenade, or throwing Diamond Lances every 10 seconds. So Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap gives you Glacial Grenades every 10 seconds, while you get to keep your class ability. You get to keep your barricade or your thruster, and throw lances every 10 seconds, right? Or as often as you can spawn them. And Hoarfrost just eliminates one of your abilities and gives you nothing extra, right? It just replaces an ability with something else. That's it. And so despite all that, I couldn't go in this week without at least bringing my Warlock in there to take advantage of 1000 Voices with a couple different exotics that we have. With that being the first one here, Rain of Fire, right? So Rain of Fire automatically reloads your fusion rifles and gives you radiant on fusion rifle kills, right? So I had to test this at least, right? So I did a bit of theory crafting before bringing it in, just kind of figuring out what I wanted to run with it. But because it's free access to Radiant, it means you don't have to use Ember of Torches, right? So that saves you a fragment slot, saves you that -10 discipline stat. Just get kills with the fusion rifle. Very easy to do with 1000 voices, obviously. And then we can have Radiant regularly, right? And because we're on Solar Warlock, it means we can also use Song of Flame for that roaming super damage and damage resistance. And additional Scorch, and then we could also run Restoration ×2 from our Healing Grenade, right? So I was originally thinking, well, this would be really fun to run with Helion, right? Because then you're just going to be setting off even more ignitions. The thing is, this was the biggest issue with the build, or at least in theory, was if you take Helion, then you're giving up Restoration ×2, and that is, Resto ×2 on Solar Warlock is like. Solar Warlock has the easiest access to Restoration ×2, and it is so good that it almost feels dumb to not take advantage of it, especially when you play on all classes, right? Like, just giving up that advantage just feels silly. So, and of course, you obviously have to use Icarus Dash with Rain of Fire, because that's how you reload your fusion rifle. I suppose you can still just use the fusion rifle and get Radiant with Rain of Fire and not auto reload by giving up Icarus Dash, but then you're not really capitalizing on Rain of Fire. So it's like, well, what do you want to do? So I ran Icarus Dash to take full effect of Rain of Fire, and I ran Touch of Flame to take full advantage of Restoration ×2, and then I figured that as long as I have Ember of Ashes and Ember of Char to increase Scorch stacks and ignition and spreading Scorch and chaining those ignitions, then that leaves me the two other fragments to really max out our effects with Restoration ×2 and Radiant. So I decided to combine Ember of Solace with Ember of Empyrean. Right, so that's going to extend the duration that you get those buffs for and allow you to chain the buff, so every single solar kill will extend the timer. So it is very effective, but I will say in GM specifically, chaining Restoration and Radiant is not really a viable strategy, because even with the maximum amount of timer that you can get, like how I was doing here, you could still lose the buffs very easily, and then you have to reacquire them, right? So whereas if you're in like a dungeon or a raid, and especially if you're solo, like I guess if you're in the Nightfall solo, yeah, go for it, because then you're the only one killing everything. People aren't stealing your kills, and you can kind of easily manage the uptime on those buffs, right? But in the end, yeah, it was effective, but it really wasn't. It didn't have the fun factor of the other builds. So I went on to test Dawn Chorus as well, because obviously Dawn Chorus increases Scorch damage, right? So it's where Ember of Ashes increases Scorch stacks and leads to ignitions quicker. Dawn Chorus increases the damage over time of Scorch by a very large amount. I think it's like triple the amount of Scorch or something like that. So I have a couple different builds that I used with Dawn Chorus. I tested it on, well, I didn't test it, I already know these builds. I've used them dozens of times on multiple different things and dungeons and raids and GMs, usually with Dragon's Breath, right? And I ended up just using Dragon's Breath in the end, I think, for a couple runs. Yeah, it's with the solar subclass with Dawn Chorus, I run obviously Ashes and Searing again, and then Singeing and Searing. So because Dawn Chorus also gives you melee energy, right? And so when you stack it with Ember of Searing, then you can really spam your Celestial Fire as your main ability. And then that allows you to just run Healing Grenade with Restoration. So I didn't have any time this week to test out sword builds, unfortunately. I wanted to run the Selfu Peregrine Greaves Heartshadow Assassin build that one-shots champions on Void Titan, that ironically he ran in the Insight Terminus. I remember a few seasons ago. It was a pretty monumental build that he displayed on his channel, so you can go check that out. I'll see if I can link it. But Yeah, I didn't get any good loot this week as far as adept weapons from the raid. 6 perks on each of them, none of them good. I got 3 okay class items for my Titan. Still no inmost synthos though, despite having 47 unique class exotic items now, but I did get inmost Star Eaters, Assassin Star Eaters, and Severance and Contact, so could be worth testing there. But yeah, that's it. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.